The story begins with someone talking about the day the gates opened, causing the fall of the world. Among the countless humans who died helplessly, a small fraction awakened supernatural powers, the so-called saviors. Also known as players, the protagonist is part of this small group, being a rank F player, the Great Emperor of Steel. He is titled Hyeonuk, the last savior of humanity. However, this grand image shatters as he starts cursing. Returning to reality, he was upside down, dressed in military uniform, admitting that his life is pretty messed up. While everyone was in a somewhat suspicious position, their commander ordered them to get their heads straight. Unfortunately, in reality, everyone who awakened powers was forced to serve in the army and the anti-monster troops, also known as AMT. The protagonist was extremely annoyed, questioning why he was in such a position if he was humanity's last savior. They were in a shooting range, being forced to stay like that under the scorching sun. There were various military trucks and weapons near the soldiers. The commander shouted, saying they were the strongest and yet had lost 9 cartridges. Suddenly, the protagonist begins to use his power. Silently, he removes one of the cartridges from his pocket. Using his abilities, he places the cartridge in his mouth. The guy asks if they are in their right minds. Immediately, everyone responds that they are not. Hyeonuk notices that a status window appears beside him. The system alerts him that he currently has 300 grams of metal for manipulation. While chewing the cartridge, the protagonist states that there's no way to be mentally okay since this is his second time serving. Suddenly, we see a fragment of a memory where Hyeonuk was spitting blood. This was a near future where he was lying on the ground while someone wearing a plague doctor mask approached. The city around him was completely destroyed. Explosions were happening while piles of corpses were scattered through the streets. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people were stacked like mountains of flesh. Smiling, he says that in the end, it wasn't the monsters that destroyed humanity but the players themselves. The person begins to remove his mask while asking if this is the last hero, the Great Emperor of Steel. Removing his mask, the man with red eyes affirms that no, saying that this is just Hyeonuk, a rank F. As he opens his arms, the man declares that the protagonist doesn't understand that they are divine beings who judge humanity. Enraged, Hyeonuk says they are not divine beings, assuring that if he had known how to get stronger before, he would have defeated them easily. With a wide smile, the man asks if he is frustrated, saying that even if the protagonist could become stronger, the result would not change. Hyeonuk cries as he looks at his opponents with extreme anger. The madman says that someone useless like him, a rank F, is destined to die this way anyway. The man leaves, saying this is the most fitting end for someone like him, while a large man lifts his hammer to finish him off. Before being struck, Hyeonuk screams the man's name, calling him Gordon Tracy. He narrates that this is how he died and that he didn't expect to regress, just like in web novels. The system congratulates him for discovering how to increase his strength and informs him that in 10 minutes the metal will be absorbed. The officer said he would fix their minds and that after he says 1, they must shout soldier, and if he says 2, they must shout mentality. While struggling to maintain his position, Hyeonuk says he has returned to the past and that his abilities are at the initial level. The officer starts shouting the number 1 followed by 2, and so repeatedly, several times. After that, they were in another location while performing a count. The officer was coordinating the troops, ordering the 2nd squad of the 3rd platoon to move in. Extremely bored, the protagonist assumes he never imagined he would return there. Even a cat got food before they did. The sergeant calls for the support squad. Hyeonuk introduces himself as a corporal, but the man says that before anything else they need to do something. Tired, the protagonist says they just finished training. With a smile, the man asks if someone mentioned training. He calls Hyeonuk a loser, while the boy says he forgot about him, a scum of the army Sanguk. The man approaches the protagonist, asking if his squad should handle the work. He claims that rank up players can't even level up, so they should take on more tasks for that reason. Sanguk asks if they would take responsibility if something urgent happened while his squad was working. Some people find it amusing that the man is humiliating the protagonist, saying he won't have it easy just because he's a corporal. Looking at the officer, extremely irritated, Hyeonuk questions how much of a failure he was in the past. Furious, the man asks what kind of look that is and if the protagonist wants to die. He extends his arm as magical circles form around him. Hyeonuk's squad mates are surprised by this. The man starts asking if the boy wants to go through with this, asserting that he is rank D, after taking a deep breath to calm himself. With a mocking smirk, Hyeonuk says they will, but asks him to give them some food first. Annoyed, the man asks what he's talking about. The protagonist tells the surgeon to look around, saying that people might think he's being abusive. Hyeonuk says he's worried that strange rumors might ruin the bright future awaiting Sanguk. Irritated that his actions did not go as planned, the man simply agrees. He says that since it was a request from the corporal, they should eat as quickly as possible, but must also do the work with the same speed. Inconveniently for the officer, he has to praise the protagonist's squad after the task is completed. He coughs, trying to cover it up while looking at the others. Angry, the man asks what they're staring at and tells everyone to go eat already. The corporal tells Jumbo to go eat, saying he's not hungry as he walks away. Confused, his squad mate watches, unsure if everything is okay. Sangmuk also watches the protagonist leave, remarking that he seems different. After walking some distance, he hides behind a wall. Hyeonuk bites his lips in anger, partially calming down, he admits he handled it well. Recalling Tracy, the protagonist admits that this was nothing compared to what that lunatic did. The system notifies him that he can now manipulate 1 more gram. The protagonist realizes that if he spends too much time here on petty fights, he won't be able to catch up to him. Still looking at the system, Hyeonuk notices that only 1 gram has increased. While grabbing several spoons, he declares he can't let the others know he can increase his level. In the cafeteria, people were arguing about where all the spoons had gone. Someone calls out to Jummo, saying they have a problem since all the spoons are missing. Outside, the protagonist, acting crazy, was eating them. He was shrinking them one by one. Hyeonuk admits they taste purely of steel. The system informs him that 13 minutes remain until the metals are absorbed, and that there has been an unexpected increase after absorbing 1.25 grams. He picks up his bayonet and notices it weighs 140 grams. If he wants to increase his weight for more impact, he will only be able to control 1. Disheartened, he notes that the cartridges weigh only 1 gram and the spoons 1.25 grams. At this rate, it will take a long time to reach his former level. He wonders if this is the only option he has, realizing he still has 3 days to prepare. Casting a sharp look, he presumes he will have to defeat a level 1 boss. His backpack begins to levitate. So do the sheath of his knife and all his clothes. Hyeonuk starts to control the bayonet with his mind as an aura glows around him. Stretching out his hand, the protagonist smiles, saying he will show everyone what it means to be a specialist. After 3 days, Hyeonuk was at the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Battalion at the Namsan Station in the 5th Post. He was in the guardhouse, accompanied by another person. It was Jummo, who watched his corporal with confusion. Indifferently, the protagonist remained as though distant. Hyeonuk looks at his watch, leaving his subordinate even more curious. The young man tells the protagonist that he seems to have changed lately. Noticing it's already 4 or 5 in the morning, the corporal asks if this bothers him. Quickly, the subordinate says it doesn't, while the protagonist checks his system. It notifies him again, showing that the protagonist can now manipulate 6 grams more, totaling 1.359 grams. The young man keeps trying to justify himself, saying the corporal has changed for the better. Suddenly, the corporal starts walking toward him, making him extremely nervous. Abruptly, the protagonist asks if the young man trusts him. Frightened, Jummo says yes. With a cold gaze, Hyeonuk questions if that's true, calling the boy by his name. His subordinate affirms it again, surprised to see the protagonist cock his weapon. All of a sudden, a portal opens near them, unleashing several monsters. The creatures rise, preparing to explore their surroundings. The monsters observe the army camp just below. Inside the barracks, the soldiers sleep peacefully. One of the creatures opens its mouth to roar, but a bayonet flies toward it. It strikes the monster, throwing it backward. The monster falls to the ground, already emitting a foul stench. In front of the gate stands the protagonist with his dagger. His energy forms a sort of thread, allowing him to control the knife remotely. Dozens of monsters are staring him down. With a smile, Hyeonuk says he never thought he'd be happy to see them. He's been waiting for them for 3 days. However, surprisingly, something catches his attention. The monster that was attacked leans on its sword, standing back up. As he manipulates his dagger, he remarks that he has never failed a surprise attack, and this proves he's still at level 1. He begins to spin the bayonet. The protagonist says this is his second life, but he truly hates doing the same thing twice. The monster charges at him again, and Hyeonuk says that if it drops something bad, the goblin will truly be dead. The creature leaps with its mouth open, but the protagonist easily decapitates it with the spinning blade. The monster falls without a single chance to defend itself. The bayonet gets stuck in a tree trunk. The remaining monsters grow furious at their comrade's death. The creature drops a red crystal. Using his ability to levitate his prize, he remarks that he knows the future. The man places the object in his mouth. Even the monsters are confused by what he just did. Chewing, Hyeonuk says he recognizes this stench. It's definitely mana steel. The creatures are utterly disgusted by his behavior. The system informs him that the amount absorbed in grams is unknown and mana will also increase after absorption. Observing the status window, he realizes that if he consumes every item he finds from now on, the difficulty of this life will be drastically reduced. Hyeonuk gives the monsters a terrifying look. They all appear deeply bewildered. The protagonist pulls the dagger from the tree. Excited, he declares that his mukbang is about to begin. Rewinding a bit to the past, after the protagonist cocked his weapon, they hear a loud roar. The corporal covers his subordinate's mouth, saying he can feel the metal vibrating. The boy asks if he can really sense it without seeing it. Jummo suggests reporting it, but the protagonist argues they would never believe a rank F could sense something he can't see. Frightened, the young man asks what they should do. The corporal asks the boy to promise him something while he goes to investigate, instructing Jummo not to abandon his post, and that he must not report this to superiors. Returning to the present moment, Hyeonuk is frighteningly excited. He declares that if the military finds out, all the drops would belong to the government. The group of monsters charges charges at him enraged. Hyunwook launches his attack, declaring that his feast begins now. As he dives into the midst of the enemies, he manipulates his dagger. The monsters gather, trying to attack him, but they only hit the ground. The protagonist managed to dodge the blow. Once again, he spins his dagger. With a flick of his hand, Hyunwook sends the bayonet toward the creatures. It cuts the Achilles tendon of one. To immobilize them, he cuts the tendons of several monsters. To his surprise, one of them is up in a tree, observing everything. The monster wears several types of necklaces, visibly furious about the situation. While some lie on the ground, unable to get up, another attempts to attack Hyunwook. In a sadistic tone, the protagonist urges them to keep screaming. Noticing another opponent's attack, he is caught off guard. Now able to manipulate more metal, he grabs one of the swords lying on the ground. With a simple hand motion, Hyunwook repels his enemy's attack. The monster loses its weapon as others approach. The creature, panicked, tries to grab its sword again, but the protagonist is already preparing to strike. With a single motion, he slashes the monster's neck. The corporal quickly regains his stance. Desperately, the creature tries to stop the bleeding. He cuts the being again, stating that this will maximize the fear. Another red crystal is dropped. Horrifying everyone further, Hyunwook screams, claiming he died once from being attacked from behind and demands to know how they dare to do that. Enraged, he threatens that if anyone attacks him from behind again, he will eat that monster alive. All the monsters bristle like frightened cats, making the protagonist realize he has instilled enough fear. As some of them retreat, Hyunwook asks if they should now begin with the main course. Looking at the crowd on his right, he admits it's a bit frustrating. Turning his gaze to the other side, he wonders where the leader is. While the boss growls, the young man keeps searching for him. However, as a cunning creature, the boss is observing the entire battle from atop a tree, extremely irritated by the situation. This was a goblin shaman. Noticing the crystal near his foot, Hyunwook remarks that he should begin and crouches to pick it up. Seeing this opening, the boss decides to attack. As he grabs the crystal, Hyunwook remarks that the goblin won't miss this opportunity. After all, he's different from these stupid monsters. With a crazed smile, he says the prey is defenseless, and the boss must attack and reveal himself. Equally smug, the boss casts a spell, breaking one of the talismans on his necklace. Sensing where the attack comes from, the protagonist feels elated. In the blink of an eye, the ground forms spikes, impaling several goblins. Meanwhile, in the barracks, a few lights are still on. A soldier asks the platoon leader if the ground just trembled. The man asks if his subordinate is scared and threatens to kill him if he wakes him again for something so trivial. Back on the battlefield, many monsters have been impaled by the spikes. They were completely pierced by the boss's attack. The survivors can't comprehend what just happened. From atop the tree, the boss observes everything. He roars, believing he has won, but something catches his attention. The protagonist declares that he has found him, leaving the boss completely startled. He throws one of the swords the monsters were wielding, spinning it like a propeller. But the shaman raises his staff. Striking the blade, he manages to deflect it. Sitting on one of the impaled monster's bodies, Hyunwook laments as that was his perfect throw. Crazily, the monster starts laughing maniacally. To the boss's surprise, the protagonist claims it was a lie while manipulating his bayonet. The shaman realizes too late about the blade. A metallic sound echoes through the forest. The corporal is left in disbelief at what he's seeing. The boss had stopped the blade with his bare hand. With some difficulty, he was gripping the protagonist's dagger with his bare hands. Furious, he glares at Hyunwook, his hand bleeding. Smiling, the protagonist admits he's surprised, acknowledging that the boss managed to stop his attack with one hand and calling him trash in the same breath. Unamused, the boss stares at the boy while still holding his blade. Preparing his rifle, Hyunwook commands him to come down, saying he will cut them all at once. Looking around, the young man realizes he bluffed. He notices the crowd of monsters surrounding him and wonders what to do now that the boss is fighting directly. To make matters worse, this encouraged the other monsters, who had lost their fear, to rally once again. To his surprise, the system notifies him of a lack of mana, stating he has used too much and only 40% remains. Hyunwook complains that his mana is the biggest issue and that now, having reached this point, he has no choice, unlocking his weapon. The boss raises his staff, preparing to attack. Frustrated, the protagonist yells that if he can't eat the boss, they will both die together, and even if it takes time, he will eat him and return to the post. The monster casts a terrifying look and smile. Suddenly, Jummo calls for the corporal. Startled, the protagonist turns around, trying to find him. The boy keeps shouting, asking where Hyunwook is. Seeing this opening, the shaman orders the others to attack. The monsters charge forward. Irritated, Hyunwook points his weapon at them. Frightened, Jummo screams as he sees the group charging toward him. One of the goblins attempts an attack, but the protagonist tells the boy to duck. Following the instruction, the boy ducks as the corporal shoots at the monster. Again, the creature prepares to dodge, but the protagonist throws one of the swords at it. The monster manages to block the attack. Even so, Hyunwook leaps at it, placing his weapon in the creature's mouth. He shoots, mercilessly killing the monster. The corporal lands just behind, trying to regain his footing. Quickly, he aims at the remaining enemies. Surprisingly, there's no one left but him and his subordinate. The portal is still open, yet not a single monster is in sight. His bayonet remains stuck in the ground. Mentally, the protagonist admits his defeat. Furious, he realizes everything is more cautious than he had anticipated. Suddenly, loud voices come through his radio communicator, reporting gunfire and identifying the area as the 5th post. Seeing no other option, the corporal begins to report that portal was opened. Informing that the monsters are goblins and have retreated from the initial area, he looks at his subordinate. Still slightly annoyed, the protagonist picks up his radio again. He announces there are no casualties. The barracks respond that they've received his report and that he must defend the post. The voice repeats once more, emphasizing that the 5th post must hold its position. Hyeonuk notices reinforcements will arrive soon. Meanwhile, a badass woman walks through a corridor as others report they'll be ready in 5 minutes for the emergency. This was the AMT Paladin, Lieutenant Seo Yuna. The protagonist reflects that if she arrives just as in his past life, the woman will eliminate all the monsters and close the portal. With that, all the equipment will fall under the army's control. He also recalls a legendary item called adamantium. This item was what earned him the title of Emperor of Steel, and if he misses this chance, the next opportunity won't come for another 4 years, and if that happens, he'll face the same fate as his past life. Frustrated, he decides he will claim the item first. Hyeonuk declares that he needs to finish this before the team arrives. He remembers that goblins require a live sacrifice. The boy asks what's going on as the protagonist tries to deduce where they've gone. Realizing that for goblins who hunt in groups, the city is too dense to be a plausible location, he arrives at another conclusion. Through his radio, someone yells that they're from the 6th post and have spotted goblins. Something glimmers among the trees, leaving the corporal and his subordinate stunned. Noticing this, the protagonist breaks into a wide grin. He shouts into the radio, identifying himself as being from the 5th post and offering to support the 6th. However, someone on the radio dismisses them, stating that there's nothing an F-rank can do. They continue insulting him, but Hyeonuk simply lowers the volume. Hyeonuk tries to stop him, warning that this will not only get him confined to the post, but also result in a court-martial. The protagonist states that the 6th post consists of archers and mages. In other words, there's no one skilled in close combat. But the boy asks what difference it will make if Hyeonuk goes alone. Pointing at the boy, the protagonist replies that he's not alone. After all, he has him. Jummo, confused, questions whether the corporal heard him correctly. Some soldiers at the 6th post were crying for help, saying that Corporal Jungnak had been taken down. Around the post, dozens of goblins were trying to breach the area. A soldier tried to shield himself while asking if his corporal was okay. On the ground, the man stated he wouldn't be able to maintain the barrier much longer, prompting his comrade to plead for help over the radio. Confused, they wondered why everything suddenly became so quiet. Outside, some rocks were floating. The shaman was using magic. He hurled several fragments of stone. Trying to protect themselves, they asked what was coming this time. Both understood it was a monster, and that after destroying the post, it would capture them and take them to the altar to be sacrificed, ripping their hearts out while they were still alive. The corporal pointed his rifle at his own face while his comrade tried to stop him, but he insisted that ending it now would be less painful. The boy cried as he watched the scene. Once again, numerous stones hovered above the post. The boss prepared another attack. Someone spoke over the radio, offering help and instructing him to load his arrow with fire and aim for the light. He repeated the command, urging the boy to load his arrow with fire and aim for the light. While following the instruction, the boy stated that they'd need an entire unit of archers like him to fight effectively. The soldier, still desperate, asked what to do as he watched the wave of stones coming his way. The boy declared he couldn't see what he was aiming at, questioning who or what he should shoot at. However, he finally sees a light amidst the stones. The protagonist was on top of one of the goblins with his flashlight on, asking the archer to simply aim his weapon at the light. Hyeonuk says he will be the one to control the trigger. With that, he makes a gesture with his finger, as if pulling a trigger. The boy's crossbow activates on its own. Shocked, he says that his trigger moved by itself. The flaming arrow flies through the stones, hitting the monster that the protagonist was holding perfectly. The creature tries to pull the arrow out. However, an explosion occurs, killing the goblin. The system notifies him that he used 1% more of his mana. Happy, Hyeonuk claims that this way he can conserve his mana. To everyone's surprise, they hear something terrifying. The shaman was watching them from above. He starts manipulating the stones again, hurling them toward the posts. The protagonist leaps, dodging the attack. A large trail of destruction is left by the boss's strike. The archer, still frightened, is instructed by Hyeonuk to reload. He also orders the boy to aim at the light again. The boss stood on a cliff overlooking the entire situation. One by one, the goblins were dying due to the coordinated attack of the protagonist and the archer. Seeing the situation, the shaman becomes increasingly enraged. In the dark forest, Jummo wonders how a soldier like him would face the boss, questioning if he wouldn't die the moment he sent the signal. However, in front of him was a battlefield covered in goblins, set ablaze thanks to his corporal's incredible strategy. The boy realizes that Hyeonuk had told him he would distract the monsters, but at this rate, he would destroy the the portal on his own. Suddenly, a monster notices his presence. It tries to attack the soldier. Jumbo freezes, unsure of what to do. Fortunately, the protagonist deflects the monster's attack with his dagger, aiming his flashlight. He moves toward the creature. Once again, Hyeonuk activates the trigger. Another arrow hits a goblin. It burns as the protagonist rushes past the soldier. Silently, he points in a direction. The boy follows his orders, saying that the rifle will cover his position. Jumno once again questions if this is really his corporal. The boss watched the destruction of all his subordinates. Hyeonuk asserts that this should be enough. As he looks at the status window, he wonders if that coward will appear, arriving at another conclusion. The system warns him that he has only 12% mana left and recommends he take that into account when acting. Frustrated, the protagonist realizes the boss is waiting for that, admitting that if his mana runs out, it will be the end for his comrades. At this moment, someone calls out to him, pleading for him to save them. The shaman is using Jumno as a hostage. The boy says he followed all of Hyunwook's orders and apologizes. Without saying a word, the protagonist raises his bayonet. However, the boss brings the sharp end of his staff closer to the soldier's neck. He starts speaking something in the goblin language. Hyunwook becomes extremely enraged. He deactivates his metal manipulation while two more goblins approach from behind him. Feigning resistance, he says that all of this is Jumno's fault. Both goblins leap and try to attack him. Smiling, he points his finger at the boss, saying this is a checkmate. He moves his finger again. The subordinate's rifle, aimed at the boss, fires. The weapon begins to fire frantically, forcing the monster to release the boy. The shaman coughs up blood as he feels excruciating pain. The corporal dodges attacks while heading toward the boss. His soldier falls next to the monster. The boy confirms that he's okay. Extremely pleased, the protagonist says that in that case, he must have a good appetite, throwing his spinning dagger at the boss, who tries to run desperately. However, when struck by the blade, the skin he wore deflects the attack. Again, the system alerts about his mana level, stating that only 9% remains. Trying to attack again, Hyunwook questions why the monster only protected his back. The shaman, consumed by fear, tries to reach the portal. He pushes himself harder and harder, trying to escape death. Noticing his enemy's plan, the protagonist throws his bayonet, asking if he really wants to go to the portal. Hyunwook shouts while running quickly. The monster was far from him and extremely close to the portal. The creature stretches out his arm, trying to escape, but its cord suddenly glows. With this, the protagonist realizes it is metal. The system warns him that he has only 7% mana left. He stretches out his hand with an open palm, and quickly closes it while pulling backward. Thus, he manages to stop the boss, even with his mana almost depleted. With no other choice, the protagonist pulls the enemy's chain even harder. The boss could do nothing to stop him. With the monster finally immobilized on the ground, he throws his dagger to deliver the final blow. His mana drops to 1% as he prays for it all to end, striking the monster's head. The impact is so strong that the ground trembles. His mana finally reaches 0%. Gasping for air, he sees that his abilities remain the same, but this body is far inferior to his previous one. Suddenly, a bright light illuminates the area and he realizes it is this sacred light. Noticing that the emergency team had arrived, and that woman was there. Desperately, he tries to find the item on the monster's body. Finally, he locates the gem and removes it with some disgust. Someone shouts that they found the portal. The soldiers demand he raise his hands where they will shoot. With no choice, the man puts the entire crystal in his mouth. They ask the protagonist to identify himself with his name and rank. With his mouth smeared in goblin blood, he turns and declares himself to be Hyunwook, a corporal. They inform him they found an injured person and call for a stretcher to carry the protagonist. The soldiers note that since the portal is still open, there must be some enemies left alive. Yuna questions whether 4 ordinary soldiers could really defeat a boss. As she examines the bodies, she concludes that this isn't exactly the case. All of them bear similar wounds. Realizing that this was indeed the work of a single person, the system congratulates him but also issues a warning, stating that the metal being absorbed will now experience a delay of 9 hours. While being carried, he smiles, realizing it was worth it. The system informs him that the metal is enchanted, and that he will gain abilities accordingly, along with an unknown amount of grams. Observing the protagonist, the lieutenant wonders how someone like him could be smiling at a time like this. The system congratulates him again, informing him that after consuming the legendary item, he will be able to detect all metals within his range. Surprised, he declares that he's finally back. A soldier announces that 2 goblins are running toward the 6th post, and Yuna quickly draws her sword. He notices that he can indeed sense the resonances of the metals around him. Raising his fist, Hyunwook proclaims that today is the day the great Emperor of Steel has finally returned. A few days after the incident, in the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Battalion, some female soldiers were discussing the rumors about rank F. They say that according to the rumors, some soldiers were awaiting death, but a rank F corporal appeared and massacred the goblins. One of them says it's just a fantasy, as that would be impossible. Meanwhile, someone else is vomiting. It was Sanguk, angrily asking if they really expect him to believe that. A soldier salutes, saying it's true, while another man tells him to lower his voice. The chubby one leans on the boy, saying that the sergeant didn't acknowledge the salute, yet an ill is lowering his hand anyway. Frightened, the soldier salutes again. He was the archer whom the protagonist had saved. The sergeant asks for the chubby man's name. He introduces himself as Wonduk, Segmuk orders him to take 3 more boys and head to a portal, but he refuses, saying it's impossible. The surgeon states that he's never seen ordinary soldiers defeat a crowd along with a boss, so he thinks it was just a stroke of luck. And that if that's the case, a disobedient rank F soldier is a danger to military discipline. The big guy starts laughing maniacally while squeezing the boy's head. Segmuk then tells Anil that they can't let this go. Meanwhile, in the barracks where the protagonist was, there were several doors in a strangely white corridor. In the battalion commander's office, someone was saluting. Hyeonuk introduces himself, saying he's there to resolve something. Internally irritated, he wonders if everything didn't go well, and if so, why they called him here. The lieutenant was also present. She was a rank B paladin. Beside her stood Lieutenant Minhee, a rank C mage. The commander asks if it's true that he disobeyed his orders to wait, also questioning if he faced the portal's first wave. This was Kangseok, nicknamed the King of the Namsan Mountains, rank B. Mentally, he notes that saying the wrong thing could lead to a military tribunal, and that he just wants to stand guard. The protagonist admits it's true, and that after the portal surge, he responded immediately. The commander remarks that someone like him in that situation would have been torn to pieces. The protagonist thinks this is truly intense pressure, and that if he has to return here in the future, his military life will be ruined. He gives a slight smile. Hyeonuk says he feels wronged and deceived by the battalion commander. The Ishigo from March 25th asks how the protagonist dares to say such a thing, but Kangseok orders him to stop. Surprised, Minhee returns to his place. Still staring at the protagonist, the commander asks why. The corporal says that he always says one thing every time he trains them, something that is always said without fail, and asks if Kangseok doesn't remember. Remembering that he always says if you're part of the anti-monsters unit, it doesn't matter if you're rank A or even rank E, you're capable of defeating trolls. He mentions that according to the commander himself, someone of rank F like him might struggle against a troll, but not a goblin, adding that if he hadn't disobeyed the control center's order, all the soldiers at the 6th post would be dead. Mentally, he acknowledges that this was his rational attack, and now he'll attack emotionally. Recalling another one of Kangseok's speeches, stating that for a true soldier, ranks don't exist, they fight with all their strength. The protagonist begins to say that, as a true soldier and as a follower of the commander, a person he greatly respects. He says he applied the tactics he acquired from difficult training, and that he only endured military life as a rank F, thanks to the admiration he has for the commander. Seeing him belittle his efforts feels as though his military life means nothing. Back when Kangseok was appointed 2nd lieutenant, the portals were opening, and he was almost killed in a fight with orcs. Yet without a moment's hesitation, he returned to the army, and became one of the first members of the anti-monsters troop. In other words, he is a true warrior. The protagonist states that he told him he admired him, and that he risked his life for his comrades. There would be no reason to send him to the tribunal. The commander grabs him by the arms, asking if this is truly his belief, calling him a soldier. With some fear, the protagonist says his name is Hyeonuk. Suddenly, the wild-eyed man asks him to become his sub-officer. Abruptly, the system congratulates him, saying the absorption is complete and that he has acquired the ability of physical transformation. Both the protagonist and the commander stare at each other in silence. Both lieutenants feel a mix of embarrassment and surprise. The commander had tears in his eyes as he nodded. On the other hand, Hyeonuk was cold sweating, a mixture of fear and astonishment. He kept staring at Kangseok, unsure how to react, questioning whether he had heard him correctly. Later, Hyeonuk was in the training room of the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Battalion. He was calmly training there, placing the weights in their proper spots. While catching his breath, he assumes he's doomed for trying to avoid both the guard post and the military tribunal. The chubby man, along with the surgeon, were watching the protagonist. Segmuk, planning something, gives an order to the guy. Hyeonuk recalls Lieutenant Minhee telling the commander that a rank F has never become a sub-officer. The protagonist thanks the lieutenant for buying him some time. After all, it's better to live like a rat than attract attention now. Wonsuk approaches, asking if the corporal is done using the bench, but he replies that he isn't yet. However, he notices something upon observing more closely. Seeing the strange smile plastered across the chubby man's face, Hyeonuk asks what he's plotting now. Wonsuk says that seeing the most famous person of the moment using only that weight would be an embarrassment to their unit. Several people present look on curiously at the situation. The protagonist notices a specific group of people laughing. He realizes it's the surgeon and suspects he's the one who orchestrated all of this, wanting to humiliate him while everyone mocks him. Hyeonuk remarks that if he avoids them now, they will bully him as they did in his past life. He admits he didn't want to draw too much attention, but since it's like this, he tells Wonsuk he was annoyed and that he showed up at the right time. Calling the chubby man out for a fight, both Segmuk and Wonsuk are taken aback. With this, everyone begins saying that 2 soldiers are about to fight. They finally step into a fighting cage. Calmly, the protagonist puts on his gloves. Similarly, Wonsuk does the same. The chubby man says it's time for him to learn a lesson. He charges straight at the protagonist, trying to land a punch with his left arm. In another place, someone asks how Choi Yeonjun went on vacation. A man admits he was excited to hear that he had the potential to become a sword saint. A soldier tries to calm the sub-officer, saying that while Myongo is considered the current ace, there's another ace in the future. The man becomes curious about this. He says that for the first lieutenant to come there and leave empty-handed is a bit disappointing and asks him to accompany him while he's there. Back at the fight, the protagonist was dodging one of the attacks. He firmly plants his foot on the ground, lowering himself and evading yet another strike. With a certain degree of ease, he manages to dodge all the attacks. However, Hyunwook ends up cornered against one of the bars. Quickly, his opponent runs toward him, delivering another powerful strike. Even the protagonist is startled by how this situation unfolds. The spectators anticipate what's about to happen and are scared. To everyone's surprise, Hyunwook rolls on the ground, escaping that position. Skillfully, he rises, positioning himself behind his opponent, making a gesture with his fingers, signaling his opponent to hurry up. The chubby man becomes extremely enraged. Watching the fight, some people begin to cheer them on. Anil says it feels like the stage is set for Mr. Myeoncho to watch. He asks the lieutenant for his opinion, noting that Wonseok's punches seem very strong. Still observing the fight, the man notices the speed of the attacks and how the opponent manages to dodge them all. Myeoncho asks what the point of it all is, considering Wonseok can't even land a hit. Anil responds that it's because he's inexperienced. If he lands a single blow, it will be a knockout for sure. Sergeant Sengbuk was furious. He yells that Wonseok is very uncoordinated and orders him to get himself together immediately. Various people start shouting, asking if Wonseok thinks fighting is a joke, and tell him to take it seriously since they're betting on him. Mentally, the chubby man admits that his body feels extremely heavy. He tries to attack the protagonist again. However, the reason for his sluggishness was that the metal in his boots was being controlled by Hyunwook. The protagonist signals with his hand, acknowledging the power of controlling steel. He pins his opponent's leg to the ground. The man completely loses his balance. As expected, Hyunwook dodges the punch again. The chubby man begins to panic, unsure of what's wrong with him. The protagonist concludes that for Wonseok, it must feel like fighting in a swamp. With a sadistic smile, the protagonist looks at him. Wonseok begs him to wait. He starts saying his legs feel strange. Hyunwook asks why he's saying this all of a sudden. With a smile, he asks if things aren't going in his favor now. Irritated like a raging bull, Wonseok curses at the protagonist, saying Hyunwook is just a rank F. With that, he uses his ability, unleashing a powerful shockwave. Both Anil and the first lieutenant are intrigued by this. Suddenly, Wonseok enters berserk mode, enhancing his body. His eyes glowed red and veins bulged across his forehead. The protagonist moves his hand. Clenching his fists, he assumes a combat stance, glaring intensely at his opponent. Myeoncho notices that with the physical enhancement, they are no longer within the realm of sparring, yet his opponent hasn't faltered. It's like a battle between an enraged buffalo and a leopard, hiding its claws. The chubby man was enormous. The lieutenant remarks that this is entertaining, while the crazed man says he told him Wonseok wasn't a joke. The man tells Hyunwook he's going to end everything right there. Suddenly, he vanishes from Hyunwook's line of sight, delivering a massive blow to the protagonist. With overwhelming force, Hyunwook is thrown against the cage. The sergeant cheers, saying, "That's my boy." Others claim this was predictable. After all, Wonseok is on a different level. They remark that he's not called the ace of the future for no reason. Wonseok feels a pain in his wrist, saying it's like punching steel with bare hands. To everyone's surprise, the protagonist was standing unharmed. He had activated his steel body ability. Smiling, Hyunwook explains that he turned part of his body into metal. He declares that this time he'll take revenge, inviting the pig to come at him. The Trembolona insults the protagonist, calling him a useless rank F. Once again, he attempts to punch him, but the corporal easily dodges. Hyunwook remarks that using such an ability against someone like him is a waste, but even so, he activates his ability to land a kick on his enemy, striking him hard on the leg. As he throws a punch, Hyunwook says that guys like Wonseok, who think they're strong, a good beating is always the cure, leaving everyone speechless. The protagonist starts beating the big guy to the ground. Even the sergeant is shocked by what's happening. The lieutenant notes that Hyunwook has finally revealed his claws. In a deeply humiliating way, Hyunwook continues to pound Wonseok. Myeoncho comments that the leopard has finally bitten the buffalo's neck, and if he is truly a wild beast, there's no reason to let go of his prey's neck. He should cut off its air. However, Wonseok lifts him with one arm and prepares to land a massive punch. With his face completely beaten, Wonseok says he doesn't know what the protagonist is using to cheat, but regardless, Hyunwook looks slightly scared, staring at his opponent. The big man shouts that Hyunwook should just die as he slams him toward the ground. The corporal is genuinely scared and terrified, but Hyunwook twists his body along with his enemy's arm. Inevitably, Wonseok feels tremendous pain. His arm stops extremely close to the ground. The protagonist had performed an armbar, completely immobilizing his opponent. The big man recognizes the move as a flying armbar. Myeoncho notes that if Wonseok had struck the ground with that punch, he would have broken his own arm, acknowledging that Hyunwook has good reflexes. Hyunwook was struggling to maintain the hold. The lieutenant observes that a normal person wouldn't be able to fight against a barbarian with physical enhancement and wonders if it's the result of overstimulation. Wonseok says it seems like the protagonist is really fighting for his life. While trying to throw a punch, Trembolona asks if Hyunwook thinks he can crush his arm like this. The boy keeps yelling while tightening his grip even more on Wonseok's hand. The big man curses at him, genuinely in pain. He opens his hand to throw the protagonist off balance. However, when he attempts to punch, Hyunwook somehow manages to evade. Quickly, Hyunwook twists backward, supporting himself on the enemy's head. In an instant, he was already applying a rear naked choke to Wonsuk, rapidly positioning himself to finish off his opponent. The lieutenant celebrates, realizing his expectations were correct. After all, physical enhancement only strengthens muscles, and compressing an artery is still possible. Wonsuk claims he just needs to use his strength. Suddenly, the protagonist starts smiling. Once again, he activates his body transformation ability. While being strangled by Hyunwook, the big man questions how even his strength cannot get him out of this situation. The system warns that he is using body transformation in an area larger than his current limit. As a result, the protagonist begins to feel intense shocks throughout his body. Once again, the status window indicates that excessive use of the ability could crush the user's body. One of the spectators asks the surgeon if they shouldn't stop this, pointing out that the big man will never give up. The protagonist was suffering greatly from the punishment of the ability. As he looks at Sanguk, he realizes that this should be enough to serve as a warning. The surgeon watches the scene, extremely nervous. Struggling to free himself, Wonsuk is incredulous that he might lose to someone like the protagonist. His vision begins to darken as he wonders if he will be humiliated in front of all these people. But he declares mentally that he is the future ace, growing even larger and angrier. Suffering intensely from the punishment, Hyunwook becomes even more frightened by his opponent's immense strength. The man grows so much that he begins to tear his own clothes. After an intense application of power, the madman becomes extremely massive, causing everything around him to crack. Both he and the protagonist were at their limits. Myongho, with a strange expression, wonders who the winner will be. After all, it's no use getting bigger if he can't escape the chokehold. And who among them is the true predator? Both of them roared, drawing strength from every possible source. However, Wonsuk's face starts turning extremely red as he clearly loses consciousness. He collapses, causing a massive impact that forces everyone to shield their faces. Without exception, everyone present stares in shock at the outcome of this situation. With the result clear, the lieutenant remarks that this is the true predator. Seeing Hyunwook atop his opponent's body, Myongva notes that he is a genuine wild beast. Someone approaches, asking if Wonsuk is okay. A few people attempt to check if the big man is still alive, but given his size, they have no idea how they'll carry him. Junmo runs toward the protagonist, saying he knew he would win. Even as Hyunwook tries to stop him, the boy keeps asking if the corporal is hurt. The corporal looks at Sanguk, who immediately averts his gaze. He was clearly uncomfortable and worried about everything that had happened. The lieutenant approaches, asking for the protagonist's name. Hyunwook immediately introduces himself as Corporal Hyunwook of the First Company. The lieutenant also introduces himself, saying that the fight he just witnessed was very impressive. He hands Hyunwook a contact card, asking if he might be interested in the Special Guerrilla Attack Unit. Some soldiers are surprised to learn that the lieutenant is from the Black Tiger Unit. They discuss the fact that the scout had just offered Hyunwook a position in the best AMT unit. The protagonist apologizes and says that he is just a rank F player. But Myongho explains that ranks are merely standards set for ordinary people, and that they need warriors like him. Internally, Hyunwook was extremely irritated that everyone wanted to recruit him. The lieutenant asks how long Hyunwook will make him hold the card. Seeing this, Hyunwook concludes that he will certainly face enemy groups later. Admitting he wants to keep his distance, the protagonist takes the card, thanking the lieutenant for his kindness. He says he'll think about it while saluting. The sergeant watches the whole scene, clearly furious. He continues glaring at the two, extremely irritated by what he is witnessing. Later, in the barracks, in the battalion commander's office, Kang Seok asks Myongho how the Black Tigers are doing these days. The first lieutenant states that they are always understaffed. The commander comments that guilds always take the best talents, whether they are of the highest ranks or even the lower levels. Suddenly, they lock eyes. Smiling, Kang Seok asks if Myongho is there because of Sergeant Yeonjun, recalling the remarkable talent of the young man. Myongho admits the commander is correct, but mentions he heard a rumor. Once again locking eyes in a tense manner, Myongho asks if Yeonjun is on leave. The lieutenant says that thanks to this, he found a very interesting soldier. Remembering the protagonist, this piques the commander's interest. The Black Tiger member continues looking at Kang Seok, waiting for his reaction. Crossing his arms, the second lieutenant wonders who this interesting soldier might be. The first lieutenant states that it is Corporal Hyunwook. The commander observes the protagonist running around the field while Jumbo tries to hug him. Kang Seok on the phone asks someone to investigate the protagonist and his past. His subordinate finally catches up, hugging him and asking to be taught how to become stronger. Hyunwook curses the boy, trying to push him away. The boy keeps following him, saying he wants to be just like him. The protagonist asks why he wants this. Whoever was on the other end of the call agrees to the commander's request, warning that the lieutenant should be careful. The protagonist, far from heroic, was running in an extremely clumsy manner. Still observing, Kang Seok apologizes to the corporal, saying that this is not his opinion and that all of this is purely his fault for letting people become so greedy, while he opens a wide and frightening smile. In a city during the night, many people were walking normally. A woman was talking to a chef while her son noticed something. The child starts running, shouting that he saw a monkey. She stands in front of an alley, shouting for the little monkey. However, it wasn't a monkey, it was a large rat. Startled, the little boy realizes that this is not a monkey. The monsters had a pentagram on their foreheads, turning toward the child. To his despair, there were countless monsters like that coming out of a portal. On the other hand, the protagonist was surprised to see something. He was in the battalion's armory with Lieutenant Yunha. She suddenly says that the commander believes in his accomplishments and gave him time off and a weapon, but the squad leader doesn't believe in him. Bored, Hyeonuk says that in his past life he was lazy and apparently that hasn't changed. While looking at a sword, he admits that whether the leader believes in him or not doesn't interest him after all. It's all in the past. Even the attendant looks a little curious about his answer. Looking at him, she asks if the corporal is really that lazy, saying that the goblins had the same blade mark, which means he stopped the first horde alone, and questions if this makes sense. The protagonist picks a small sword while stating that it's perfect. The boy swings the weapon, while Yunho looks confused by his behavior. The woman tells him not to choose any weapon just because she's pressuring him, but Hyeonuk says he genuinely likes this one. This was the cloud blade, which has the effect of absorbing and holding water, creating a humid mist. The protagonist admits that now it seems useless, but with this single sword, Yeonjun became known as the Sword Saint. The true name of this item is Black Hand of the Master of Clouds, according to the mythology of Dangan, where 3 gods of time descended to Earth: the Lord of Wind, the Master of Rain, and the Master of Clouds. His black hand was called the Hand of Darkness. After releasing all of his power, you can activate the ability of hidden blades among the clouds, generating powerful lightning. With a smile, he assumes that with the manipulation of steel and lightning, nothing will be able to stop him. The lieutenant asks if this old sword is really too small of a reward considering his accomplishments, but he says he is satisfied. He begins to say that there is no time to choose anything else. Suddenly, they hear a very loud noise, which even surprises Yuna. The control tower then informs everyone that a portal has appeared in Ankawan. Immediately, the soldiers begin to prepare for combat. The protagonist is not pleased to hear this. The girl is curious about the fact that Hyeonuk is extremely calm and not surprised by the situation, as if he was expecting it. At the city entrance, some knights block the entry of people. Someone in an extremely glamorous armor walks through the streets while other soldiers accompany him. Some army soldiers are impressed by the presence of the Blue Flower Guild, saying they were sent as reinforcements for this portal. They start talking about how all the armor and weapons are stylish products and nothing more. One of them says that if they sold all the equipment they saw, they could buy a whole building in Gangnam. Suddenly, another army squad appears marching and preparing for battle. Kenwook says that as they already know, this is a portal for kobolds, and even though they are small, they are very dangerous with their weapons. One of the soldiers starts rolling up his sleeve, but the protagonist shouts at him, telling him not to do that while on duty. Jamo asks why the monsters haven't arrived there yet and questions if they really need to be so serious. But the corporal asks if he would like to have his eyes ripped out while still alive. Frightened, the boy says no, and the protagonist tells everyone to check their gas masks for emergencies. Laughing, one of those soldiers approaches, saying that apparently the trash squad also has strategy meetings. Jummo looks down after hearing this. Seeing the reaction of his subordinate, the protagonist gets genuinely angry. Hyunwook tells both of them that the kobolds escaped from the evacuation zone and that everyone should keep their masks close. Convinced, the guy says he can take care of it on his own, saying that he's not someone who needs advice from people like him. The protagonist tells him not to forget this, but the guy says he understood, calling him the commander of the useless squad. His men once again look discouraged. Hyunwook becomes even more irritated by all this arrogance. Speaking to his squad again, he orders them to pull themselves together. He says that this isn't the first time they heard this, but now their lives are at risk, so they can't afford to be shaken. Everyone agrees with their commander. He informs them that the kobolds are small monsters, so they should place motion sensors in sewers and tight spaces. With this, he comments that everyone has 20 minutes to do everything. The protagonist calls for Jummo, who promptly agrees. The soldiers begin talking about how the protagonist is extremely serious and anxious today, at the place where the army supplies were stored. The boy is confused, not understanding why the corporal called him. He looks at his subordinate silently. Embarrassed, Jummo asks what he wants. Hyunwook was about to say something when a dart hits him in the neck. A kind of poison begins circulating through his veins. Suddenly, he falls to the ground. One of the manhole covers that the soldiers were placing sensors on explodes. As a result, all the others explode as well. The soldiers try to cover their mouths and noses to avoid inhaling the poison. Just as their leader had said, they begin putting on their gas masks. Several kobolds appear, attacking the soldiers. Agonizing on the ground, paralyzed by the poison, Hyunwook only watch. Suddenly, a monster approaches him. It was the portal boss. He observes his enemy as his pupils dilate. The kobold raises a dagger to stab him. Still immobilized, the protagonist can only watch as the enemy tries to strike him with a blade. Suddenly, a soldier throws his body at the boss. There was Jummo, who asks if the corporal is alright, though he had been grazed in one of his eyes. The boy tries to help him while the kobold watches them from within the poison mist. Suddenly, the monster's mask starts to burn. Gathering the last of his strength, the protagonist orders Jummo to run. Confused, he asks what's going on and urges Hyunwook to put on the mask. However, the boy's head is detached. Desperate, the corporal screams for his soldier. But returning to the present moment, Jummo is standing in front of the protagonist, asking what it's all about. Looking at the boy, Hyunwook says that in his past life, his subordinate died trying to save him from the kobolds. Some soldiers report that they'd just installed the sensors and ask for more. Mentally affirming that the real battle at this portal will happen in the rear guard, he calls Jummo's name again. The boy asks him to give the order, stating he will do whatever is necessary. Hyunwook says he will send a signal to him later, after which he must gather the members of the squad and take them out of the operation area. The soldier is confused, not understanding what's going on. A truck drives through the streets at high speed. Startled, Jummo asks if this isn't military desertion. Calmly, the protagonist states no, saying it's a military tactic. The soldiers were conducting a sweep of the city, searching for survivors and monsters. They also report that the estimated number of kobolds is 200. They were entering a large area of magic. The person in charge of the operation gives the command. Responding to their leader, all the soldiers quickly enter the warehouse. They say that the infiltration at Point P is complete and that the formation must be strengthened. With that, the control tower gives the command for the attack squad to release the magic circle. The shield bearers form a kind of cage while the magic circles are emitted above their heads. They are surrounded by kobolds who start moving toward them. The monsters scream as they advance to attack. A horde of dozens, therefore, some curved weapons are launched toward the squad. The leader tells everyone to wait as the monsters decrease the distance between them. He maintains the order to wait. Finally releasing them to attack, all the soldiers begin to strike, while the magic circles release fire. Thanks to this tactic, they are able to incinerate several monsters at once. The protagonist is still coordinating his squad, urging them to move faster. Zones 2 and 5 have all the sensors installed. He marks an X with tape on the ground. Lieutenant Minnie approaches, asking what Hyunwook is doing. He greets him, saying he is fixing the motion sensors according to the manual. Marking the location with aluminum tape, the lieutenant calls it a trash job. The members of the Blue Flower Guild are still preventing people from entering the city. He tells the protagonist to stop acting like a fool because of a kobold portal. The guy says that the first platoon will begin the operation in 20 minutes and that they are the support team, so they should just pick up the detoxifiers. Seriously, the protagonist states that the mission assigned to the support squad by the platoon's vice commander is to prevent the monsters that manage to escape from the rear guard of the civil area. Looking around, the lieutenant becomes uncomfortable. Irritated, he says that this is serious. He asks if Hyunwook has forgotten his place after the battalion commander showed some gratitude toward him. While pushing the protagonist's helmet, he says that this is the guy in the barracks right now, but the protagonist says his name. Touching his helmet again, the lieutenant says he only has one portal with real experience. Irritated, Hyunwook repeats his name again. Minnie asks if Hyunwook dares to teach him, telling him to take that look off his face. A subordinate runs over to them, asking them to stop. The girl tells the second platoon leader that there is something urgent. He realizes it's the vice leader of the platoon and asks her what's wrong. Mentally, the protagonist assumes this is why he provoked him to come here. She is the lieutenant's weak point. The guy starts saying he was there helping the support squad. The scoundrel asks what she's doing there. Seonha informs him that the battalion commander is calling for soldier Hyunwook. Even the protagonist is surprised by this. After some time, a woman with red hair is on top of a building while observing the city. With her is a sniper. They are watching two people. It is Seonha with Hyunwook. She asks him not to let the leader of the second platoon affect him, but he says that he still has work to do. The girl says she will finish setting up the sensors and asks him to go to the commander. The protagonist just nods. Observing the situation, he realizes that he doesn't have much time left, and he wonders what the battalion commander is planning. A soldier asks Yoonha if it's alright for her squad to stay there. The woman confirms that it's a direct order from the commander. She also says that being a soldier means following the orders they receive. In the temporary command post, the commander greets Hyunwook. Both he and Myongo are staring at the protagonist. Confused, Hyunwook wonders what the first lieutenant is doing there, and why he's gathered with the battalion commander. The commander says that he will replace Yeonjun, who is currently on leave, and will lead the first attack platoon against the portal. Losing his mind internally, the protagonist says that the commander never paid attention to him in his past life and questions why this is happening now. Nervous, he assumes he doesn't have time for this and needs to get organized. He calls for the second lieutenant. Hyunwook says that he has only commanded the support squad since entering the base and that this would put the entire platoon at risk. Still inside the temporary control station, Kang-sok looks coldly and says that this is an order. The protagonist can do nothing but lament. Suddenly, Team Delta reports that the boss has left the kobold nest and asks the groups in zones 2 and 3 to remain on alert. Apprehensive, Hyunwook realizes that his squad will be attacked soon, and if he doesn't act quickly, the entire rear guard will be wiped out. Grinding his teeth, he decides that he needs to leave as quickly as possible, at any cost. Suddenly, he tells the commander that he has something to say. Staring at him, Kang-sok tells him to go ahead. The protagonist remains silent for a moment. Yoonha is still observing the protagonist's squad. She notices him running through the alleys. The girl is confused by this behavior. He desperately runs as fast as he can. The protagonist shouts for the support squad, telling them to put on their gas masks. At this moment, a loud noise is heard. The sensors begin to beep uncontrollably. Everyone present is extremely frightened. The poison, just like in his past, starts leaking through the sewers. Hyunwook gets caught in the explosions. Seeing everything covered by the poisonous mist, he begins to rage. Covering his mouth and nose, the protagonist admits that it happened faster than he remembered. Going back a bit in the past during his conversation with the battalion commander. After the commander asked him to finish saying what he wanted, Hyunwook says that he heard rumors that on Kang-suk's first mission, he lost his entire platoon. The first lieutenant is shocked to hear this. The protagonist says that's why he doesn't believe Kang-suk is ordering him to lead an attack platoon, being the corporal of the useless group. With that, he asks if the commander considers him and the other regular soldiers disposable. Kang-suk denies it, saying it's a misunderstanding and that his personal attack squad will follow him. But the protagonist interrupts, saying that if it's to follow an order from him, he would give his own life. Twisting inside, Hyunwook feels frustrated that he can't tell him that he knows about the future. The protagonist continues, saying that if he commands any platoon other than his own, there is a very high chance of casualties, saying that he is grateful for the expectations the commander has for him. But if this costs the lives of his comrades, he will disobey. Kang-suk remains silent with a dark expression. The first lieutenant tells him that disobedience during wartime is a military crime. Inside, Hyunwook screams that he knows, but if he doesn't act now, the entire rear guard will be dead. After a pause of a few seconds, the commander says it's fine and that he should continue with the original support mission. Even the protagonist is surprised by such a reaction, but he says he has a condition. Kang-seok says that as a true soldier, he will have to face the consequences of disobeying a direct order. Returning to the present moment, the area is completely covered in poison. Hyunwook tries to find his squad. He quickly puts on his mask. While securing it on his face, he continues cursing, irritated by his delay. Using his inventory pouch, he grabs the Blade of Clouds. Pouring water from his canteen onto the sword, the system identifies that 25% of its capacity has been absorbed. The protagonist realizes that he can't see anything due to the gas and wonders if he arrived too late. Looking through the thick poisonous mist, mentally, he prays that Jumno managed to gather everyone and escape. However, someone was being attacked by one of the monsters. The man screamed as he was pierced by the kobold's pickaxe. He cries out asking for Jumbo's help. The boy sees the situation, surprised. He quickly positions his weapon to defend his comrade. While cursing the monster, the soldier fires, trying to push it away from the injured man. The monster, seeing that it was being attacked, stops striking the man. It leaps into the mist. The soldier places his hand on the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Jumbo tells everyone to get behind the barricade and bring Minte with them. One of them says that they secured the safety of the injured soldier. He drags Minte while leaving a trail of blood on the ground. The platoon vice leader is in complete shock. The boy tells her to regain her composure. Seeing the woman's situation, he understands that it's normal since she's barely 20 years old. While trembling, Jumbo says that besides that, it's her first real mission after the approval. He assumes that he can do nothing for his comrades in such a war. The soldiers inform Jumbo that they are running out of ammo and they are down to their last magazine. Nervous, the boy begins to question what he should do and whether they have any chance of survival. At that moment, he wonders what the corporal would do in such a situation. One of the soldiers says that Minte needs medical help and asks the vice leader to go to them. Someone starts using their inventory backpack. The troops shout desperately, informing that they are out of ammo. Jumbo had grabbed a hammer in his hands. He shouts that now is the chance for the support team. The boy says that kobolds are attracted to shiny things, so he will draw their attention away. He orders all members of the platoon to leave with Shanha. The girl, confused, asks what he is planning. Raising his hammer, Jumbo says that this is his order as the vice leader of the squad, stating that the blue flower is out of the evacuation zone. Therefore, when he gives the signal, everyone must run for their lives. He assumes that his electrical power is pathetic, but he can use it to save these people's lives. Determined, he runs while raising his hammer. The monsters, seeing that, become extremely focused on the light. All the kobolds run after him, leaving the battlefield to chase him. He shouts that this is everyone's chance, telling them to run. The soldiers shout his name as they watch him. The monsters approach him. Jumbo tells everyone that if the corporal were there, he would use his pathetic power for this, and that he would definitely use him as bait. Suddenly, the protagonist's bayonet cuts through all the monsters chasing him. It was so fast that even Jumbo loses his balance slightly. He bangs his head into Hyunwook. The protagonist curses him, saying he heard everything. He was raising his sword. The system notifies that his cloud was purifying the toxic gas as it spread, with a 100% absorption rate. He remains silent as he uses the ability of his blade. Falling to the ground, the boy is surprised by the corporal's return. Unexpectedly, Hyeonuk says his name. Crying, Jumbo says that he was only imitating him and that he had always been carried by the protagonist. With a smile, he thanks the boy for staying alive, saying that he did a great job. Jumbo can't hold it in and starts crying. The kobolds continue advancing toward them. The protagonist admits that he is truly proud of his subordinate and that thanks to his incredible courage, he will be able to enjoy this feast. With a sadistic look, Hyeonuk shouts that since a beautiful meal has been prepared for him, he will devour everything eagerly. He begins to manipulate his bayonet while using the Cloud Blade's ability. The protagonist executes several cuts on the monster's bodies. Without even moving, he kills all the kobolds approaching them. Essence crystals fall to the ground like an endless fountain. He remains silent again. The bipolar man starts laughing, saying that this is delicious. Jumbo asks if he's talking about the monsters. Afraid, the kobolds stop attacking. Looking at his subordinate, the protagonist realizes that he can't eat the crystals because of him. The monsters, with a certain level of fear, are just standing there watching Hyeonuk. Confused, the protagonist asks where their leader is. The pentagrams on the monsters' foreheads begin to glow. The protagonist's attention is drawn in one direction. Not unlike him, the kobolds also look in the same direction. Hyeonuk says that he can't believe it, while Jumbo doesn't understand what's happening. They hear an extremely loud scream. Leaving them confused, the monsters turn their backs and run in the direction of the screams. The protagonist also runs, shouting that the members of the squad are in danger. The commander's emergency squad remained on top of a building, noting that the situation was very complex because of the mist. The lieutenant orders the attack squad and the blue flower to destroy all the monsters that come out of the poison. One of the soldiers asks why these orders are being given and if she's going somewhere. Yuma notices that the corporal acted as if he knew this would happen, telling her comrade that she needs to confirm a few things. With that, she leaps into the poison zone. The platoon vice leader was begging for someone to save her. One of the soldiers was trying to keep Minte alive while shouting for Shionha to compose herself and help. Many members of the squad were injured. They realized that the barricade is being broken. Those who were still partially able to move tried to hold the barrier, noticing that the boss was trying to take it. The monster was using a spell to draw it towards him. His head was on fire as he tried to remove the protection from the soldiers. They realized that the kobold has breached the protective barrier. Still trying to hold the barricade, they realized the monsters are coming toward them. The creatures were coming quickly while raising their weapons. Unfortunately, they accept that this will now be the end for all of them. Suddenly, something catches the boss' attention. The protagonist runs while calling for the monster. He curses all of them, calling them filthy rats. While using his seal manipulation, Hyeonuk orders them not to touch that. The blade comes toward the boss's head. The monster cancels his magic while dodging the attack. However, to his surprise, the dagger makes a sharp curve. The boss begins to dodge while trying to escape. He realizes that with every moment, the blade gets closer. Leaping again, he manages to evade. With some difficulty, he regains his balance. The boss realizes that his vase was cracked. Irritated, he glares at the protagonist while the flames on his head disappear. The pentagrams on the other kobolds' foreheads begin to glow. They start to scatter. Hyeonuk is surprised by this. In an instant, all the monsters leap in different directions. They take distance from the protagonist. They begin to use a type of blowgun. Several darts fly toward him and Jumbo. Using his cloud blade, he parries all the attacks. To his surprise, they also attack from the other side, leaving the boy defenseless. Desperately, Hyeonuk orders his subordinate to duck. He does as ordered. The protagonist uses his metal control ability, deflecting all the darts. He uses the thorns against the kobolds themselves, but he loses control and his bayonet. It falls beside the boss. The kobold looks directly at the protagonist. Hyeonuk says that this is not the real boss. He is just the dark mage while shooting with his weapon and controlling his cloud blade. Noticing that the mage is literally controlling his own kind, or rather, it's useless to scare them. He admits that it's very dangerous to fight with Jumbo by his side. The protagonist orders the boy to run to the protection box. They run while trying to survive. The monsters use their blowguns again. The corporal and his subordinate were already approaching the barricade. Once again, the darts fly toward them, but this time they are coming from behind. He uses his metal manipulation ability again, deflecting the attacks. Just like Jumbo, he jumps into the barrier. Another dart tries to hit him, but it's stopped by the barricade. Seeing this, the boss stands still, glaring at the protagonist as he purifies everything around him. The monster growls as it looks at him. With a mocking smile, Hyeonuk says it's a little late, but at least they managed to arrive. Turning his gaze back to the barrier, he sees the situation of his soldiers. Everyone is extremely happy to see their corporal. Jumbo says that Minte lost consciousness. He asks what the boy is talking about since the person who can fix this was already there. However, Seoma was completely terrified, curled up and trembling in a corner. Angry, he asks what the girl is doing since one of the soldiers is dying. Realizing that Seonha is in a panic attack, he doesn't know what to do since she's the only healer they have. Realizing that at this rate, they will be annihilated. He speaks to the vice leader, calling her Sergeant Seonha. For a moment, she snaps out of it. After she regains her senses, the girl looks confused at the corporal. In front of her, Hyeonuk was clearly not happy. In a calm but stern manner, the protagonist asks if she wants everyone to die, telling Seonha to regain her composure. because they are on the battlefield and she cannot live her entire life with regret. She was scared, but even so, a light emerged in the void. The girl was trying to use her power on the injured boy. Hyeonuk asked the vice leader how he was doing, but at that moment, he had lost too much blood because she had delayed. But determined, she said she would not give up. Hyeonuk thanked her while instructing the others to lend their swords. The curly-haired one asked if he was really going, but he looked angry, saying he would repay those scoundrels in kind. At that moment, a car was shown passing by and someone on the phone was saying that it was incredible. Inside the car, a woman with a spider on her shoulders said she would make a consolation visit, and so they headed to Itaewon. We returned to Hyeonuk in the middle of the monster fog. He walked to an X marked on the ground. At that moment, one of the monsters was hiding behind a pillar, watching because in the same second, several monsters attacked. Confident, Hyeonuk thought the prey had walked straight into the trap of its own free will because from this central point, he had set up boxes and sensors in designated locations. And so it would be game over once he laid his hands on the leader controlling everything from behind the curtains. He opened his eyes using metal detection, because every metal he didn't recognize in his area had to be a cobalt. Then he prepared his swords in the sky, and using the ability of metal control, he directed them all to attack the hidden monsters. From afar, it was possible to see the massacre beginning inside the place. The monsters tried to flee, but even so, they were struck by the metallic daggers. When he was approaching another one, the monster used a red power, invoking a circle. It tried to defend itself using that, but now Hyeonuk knew where it was and ordered the others to head in that direction. The monster kept roaring while Hyeonuk observed cleverly because with that red circle, it was holding off the attacks. Hyeonuk moved his hand, trying to make his swords return to attack again. When it wasn't working, the system appeared by his side, and the monsters from before began coming back to life. They shot several dart-like projectiles at Hyeonuk. He saw all of that coming without being able to defend himself. The darts struck him from the front while the monster boss successfully defended himself and was invoking powerful magic. The boss pointed a finger in Hyunwook's direction, and all the monsters started charging with their weapons. Even with his body pierced by darts, he stood up, throwing them away, because if not for the body-strengthening transformation, it would have been fatal. He grabbed his swords back and glared angrily at the monsters because they would pay for what they had done. He moved his arms while controlling the swords, defeating several monsters in his path. At that moment, a tornado began forming with the movement of the swords in the air. He finally seemed to have defeated all the smaller ones. Then he turned back, calling out for the dark mage Cobalt, because it was time for them to settle the score. Hyunwook tried to defend himself from all that wind, but it was pointless to keep fighting because he had already put in so much effort just to leave that scoundrel alive. Then he opened his eyes using metal detection because if he threw the daggers recklessly like last time, he would lose them again. So he needed to be careful in this new attack. Hey everyone, did you enjoy this story? I really liked it. If you want to follow the next part, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next story, guys.